I have pushed a lot of gurneys through a lot of doors in 11 years on the overnight shift at Prentice County General. I have seen attending physicians who couldn't find a vein under pressure and nurses who could run a trauma bay better than most surgeons I've watched. I try to keep my opinions to myself. It's not my job to judge the doctors. It's my job to get the patient from point A to point B without dropping anything. But what I saw on the night of the 3rd of February, I have not stopped thinking about it since, and I don't think I ever will. Her name was Marin, and she worked the overnight float. That meant she went wherever the staffing holes were, which meant she went wherever nobody particularly wanted to be. Triage overflow. Geriatric hall. Supply runs. The float nurse on the overnight shift at a county hospital does not get treated like a colleague. She gets treated like a tool left in a closet, pulled out when somebody needs her and put back without comment. Marin had been at Prentice for about 8 months when it happened. She was quiet in the way some people are quiet because they're shy, and quiet in another way entirely, the way that comes from having spent years in conditions where every unnecessary sound was a liability. I didn't know that then. I didn't know much about her at all. I knew she wore plain navy scrubs, that her badge said float, that she kept her hair pulled back tight, and that she had a way of standing very still when she was watching something that other people were missing. Dr. Harlan Voss, the charge physician on nights, had a word for float nurses. He called them bandwidth. As in, get me some bandwidth for the intake desk. As in, she was a utility and not a person. I watched him look through her half a dozen times in those 8 months. She never flinched. She'd just nod and go do whatever she was sent to do, and she'd do it well, and nobody would say anything about that part. The call came in at 3:12 in the morning. A man, approximately 60 years old, blunt trauma to the chest, he'd been the passenger in a vehicle that went off an elevated road in the rain. The other occupant hadn't made it. Paramedics had him on a backboard with a chest seal in place and in 4 running wide open, and they were moving fast. I was at the ambulance bay doors when they brought him through. I got my first look at him under the bay lights. He was broad through the shoulders with close-cropped gray hair, and he was fighting the backboard, which was either a good sign or a very bad one. His blood pressure was dropping, the lead medic said. His breathing was wrong. They'd suspected tension pneumo at the scene and put the seal on, but something wasn't right and they knew it. Dr. Voss met them in the bay. He had 2 residents with him and a trauma nurse named Della who'd been there 4 years. They moved the patient into Bay 3, which is the big one, and I stayed out of the way by the door the way I always do. What happened in the next 8 minutes, I watched from 4 feet back. The residents were working fast but not right. One of them had the wrong read on the chest x-ray and was arguing about it. Voss was talking over both of them. Della was calling out the vitals, and the numbers were not good, pressure falling, sat dropping, heart rate climbing. The patient was going the wrong direction and the team was behind the problem. Marin came in from the corridor behind me. She'd been nearby, supply run, I found out later. She stepped into the doorway, looked at the monitor, looked at the patient, and something shifted in her posture. She didn't move like someone who was uncertain. She moved like someone who had just recognized a situation and had already calculated what needed to happen. His SAT is 61, she said. It wasn't loud. It was just a fact, stated clearly, the way you'd read a coordinate off a map. Nobody looked at her. She stepped forward. The seal's occluding. He's got a tension build on the right. You need to decompress before you intubate or you're going to lose him. Voss turned. He looked at her badge. Float. He looked back at the resident. Continue, he said. She did not leave. She stood there with her hands at her sides, watching the monitor, watching the patient, watching the resident's work. Watching the pressure continue to drop. I have replayed what she did next more times than I can count, and every time it lands the same way. She put on a pair of gloves, picked up the shears from the instrument tray. Nobody stopped her because I think nobody registered that she'd done it, and she moved to the patient's right side. She cut his shirt open from hem to collar. Fast, clean, one motion. She stopped. I saw it before I understood it. There was something on the chain around his neck, 2 dog tags, the way service members carry them. Standard issue. But on the second tag, below his blood type and service number, there was a small stamped designation. She read it. I was close enough to see her face. Something happened to her expression that I don't have a word for. Not shock. Not fear. It was recognition, profound and sudden, and beneath it something that looked almost like weight, the weight of a long-held thing that had just come back to find her. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she opened them, and she went back to work. She placed her fingers on his chest wall, counting ribs, moving by memory and touch. She turned to Della. 14-gauge angiocath. Now. And get me a flutter valve. Della looked at Voss. Voss said nothing. Della got the needle. What Marin did in the next 4 minutes, I have since looked up, not because I didn't believe it, but because I wanted to understand what I had seen. A needle decompression for tension pneumothorax. The right intercostal space, second rib, midclavicular line. She found it without hesitation, the way someone finds a doorknob in a dark room they've been through 1,000 times. She placed the needle, and the air came out in an audible rush, and the sat monitor began to climb. 61. 68. 74. Voss had gone very quiet. The patient's pressure stabilized over the next few minutes. His heart rate came down. She completed the valve placement and stepped back, checked the monitor once, then stood with her hands folded in front of her while the residents finished the secondary survey. Della was watching her. I was watching her. Even Voss was watching her now, but not the way he'd looked at her before. Not through her. At her. She didn't look back at any of us. She was watching the patient. Nobody asked her anything that night. She wrote her interventions in the chart, thorough, precise, the clinical shorthand of someone who had charted under worse conditions than a county trauma bay, and she went back to her supply run. I saw her leave. She didn't say a word about what she'd done. I thought about the dog tags all night. I thought about what I'd seen on her face when she read them. He was in the ICU by 4 in the morning. Stable, sedated, breathing on his own. The kind of stable that looks unlikely when you compare it to where he'd been an hour before. I was at the nurse's station at 6:45 when Della told me, quietly, that the patient was starting to surface. I don't know why I walked up to the ICU. It wasn't my job. But I walked up. He was awake when I got there. Barely, eyes open, working through the confusion that comes with sedation and fluorescent light and an unfamiliar ceiling. A nurse was at his bedside doing the standard neuro check. He answered the questions slowly. His eyes moved around the room. Then they found her. Marin was across the room, filling in a chart at the standing desk in the corner. She hadn't been assigned to his care, she was just finishing paperwork before the shift change. She hadn't noticed him looking at her yet. He lay there for a moment watching her. I watched him watching her. And then something assembled itself in his face as a recognition, the same thing I'd seen in hers the night before, except his was slower, coming up through sedation and exhaustion and something that looked like disbelief. He cleared his throat. She looked up. The word he said was one word. Not her name. Her call sign. Harbor. I didn't know what it meant then. I found out later. But I can tell you what I saw. She went completely still. The way she went still was different from the way a person freezes in surprise. It was the stillness of someone whose entire body has recognized something before the mind has caught up. She set the chart down. She walked across the room. She stopped at the foot of his bed. "Sir," she said. That was all. He looked at her for a long time. His voice was rough from the intubation prep, hoarse and slow. "I trained you," he said. "Karangal. 09. She nodded. "You put a needle in my chest." "Yes, sir." "Good call," he said. That was when the ICU nurse, not Marin, the one doing the check, that nurse stepped out to tell someone what was happening. Word travels fast in a hospital when something unusual is going on. Within 20 minutes, Dr. Voss was in the corridor outside the ICU. He wasn't being called. He just appeared, the way people appear when they feel like something is occurring that they should know about. They came at 9:17. I was at the end of the corridor when the elevator opened, and 4 men in army dress green stepped out, followed by 2 more, and then 2 after them, 8 total, moving with a kind of quiet deliberateness that made the corridor feel smaller. Behind them came a man in a suit, carrying a folder, and a woman in army service uniform who I later learned was a records officer. They asked at the nurses' station for the overnight float nurse. Not by name. By shift. They knew she'd been there. Somebody pointed them down the hall. Marin was at the medication station when they found her, logging the end of shift count. She looked up. She looked at the group of them in the corridor. She set her pen down. The one in front, a colonel, I found out later, from the same unit she'd served within the Karangal, he stopped 6 feet from her and reached into the folder the suited man was carrying. He took out a document. It was a commendation order, signed and dated, and the date on it was 14 years old. "This should have reached you in 2012, he said. There was an administrative error. It was classified under a records consolidation and never forwarded. We found it 8 months ago and we've been looking for you since." She took the document. She read it. Her hands were steady. The colonel said, quietly, "The 6 men you kept alive in that valley, they all made it home. All 6. The one in the ICU down the hall is the last one I can account for." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, 7. There were 7. He nodded once. 7. I stand corrected. What he did next, I don't think he planned it. It wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't staged. He simply came to attention in the corridor of a county hospital at 9:17 in the morning, and he saluted her. And the 7 soldiers behind him came to attention and did the same. Dr. Voss was at the end of the corridor. He had walked up during the exchange, and now he stood there with his hands at his sides, and he did not move, and he did not speak. He watched every salute. He watched her receive them without flinching, without gloating, without tears, just quiet and steady and straight, the same way she'd stood in his trauma bay every night for 8 months while he looked through her. I watched him watch her, and I think I saw the moment it landed. Not shame, exactly. Understanding. The kind that comes too late but comes honestly. She shook the colonel's hand. She spoke for a few minutes with the soldiers. She thanked the records officer. The whole thing was brief and quiet, the way the most significant moments in a hospital tend to be, conducted in low voices between people who understand the weight of what is being said, while the building moves around them and the monitors keep counting. When they left, she went back to the medication station and finished her count. I drove home at 10:15 that morning thinking about what it means to stand somewhere for years, doing your job well, being looked through. And about the fact that the night that finally changed things, she hadn't done it for recognition. She'd seen a man in a trauma bay going the wrong direction, and she'd done what her hands knew to do. The dog tags hadn't changed the calculation. The 14 years hadn't changed it. She'd already committed before she read his name. That's the part one can't stop thinking about. She was going to save him either way.